Well, I wanted to talk about approving the will of God tonight. Approving the will of God for our lives. Because we all need to know what the will of God for our life is. It's dangerous not knowing what the will of God is for your life. And then walking around not knowing the will of God, who needs that? Especially us, who Jesus has called. We got to know what the will of God is for our life. So we are constantly trying to discover what God is trying to do in our life and doing the best we can at that and making the most of the opportunity that God has given to us and being as excellent as we can at doing it. Because when the world looks at us and our reputation with the world is affected by how we serve God, then that matters, because the world is looking at you and I. Even though they don't tell us and they look like they're busy doing their own thing and caught up in whatever they're doing, they still are watching our life, especially when we're testifying about Him. When we testify about Him to people that we know, that we're around, that know us, then they're watching our life. And it matters what we say and what we do, and what we say about Christ matters. And so we have to constantly be approving the will of God. We have to be constantly discovering God's will for our life and do it. So, and I'll be in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, if you want to turn there, and I'll read and then talk. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters. This is a strong call to come stand beside. See, he's using a real strong call to come stand beside what God is telling you to do. He's urging. He's saying, come close to what God is saying. Come close as you can to hear what the voice of God is for your life. Make yourself available. Any opportunity you have, make yourself available to hear what God is trying to say to you. See, He's trying to say something to each one of us at any given time.
Yes.
Our willingness to make ourselves available to hear Him, that's what He's saying here when He says, I urge you. He's saying, come stand beside what God is trying to do in your life. Come listen intently. Come offer yourself. Come make time for Him and what He is trying to say to you in the view of God's mercy. See, we do that. We make ourselves available to what God is trying to do in our life because it's in the view of His mercy that we're doing that. Because God had mercy on you and I. Because God had loving kindness on us. He spared us from all the things that we would have went through and all the things that we have already gone through. And yet we're still alive. And yet we're still here. And so this word in the Greek is different from the Hebrew word. It's the word chesed, which means loving kindness. It's the compassion of God. It's the character of God that He is compassionate toward you and I. That even though we deserve something different, we don't get what we deserve.
Yes.
We get the loving kindness of God. And when the character aspect of the loving kindness of God comes into our life, then you and I are able to think clearly again and start getting back on track and start trying to prove what the will of God is for our life and gladly doing it. And gladly doing it because we know the success that we have when we do. He only produces success for us when we hear His voice and obey. When we seek out what His will is and when we do it. There's only success for us ahead. There's some affliction that comes with it, but we will be successful in anything we do. He cannot fail us. He will not fail us. He always goes before us. His promise to you and I is that He will do all these things that He says He will do in our life. And so He's saying, in the view of God's mercy, because God is so merciful to you and I. That's why David said, you are to be feared, O God, because there is mercy with you. Therefore are you feared among men. That's why we fear God, because there's mercy with Him. He doesn't give us according to... It says in the Scripture that He didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but the world through Him might have life. So see, like Pastor Adams was saying this morning, the world is already condemned. Jesus already knew that, but He came to give us life.
Yes.
And so in view of God's mercy, He says to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, not as a dead sacrifice. The Old Testament system was full of dead animals. Well, they were alive, but they killed them and now they're dead. And then that was it. And then God was supposed to be happy after that happened. You offered Him the best that you had. You took your money. You bought an animal. You came and offered it to God. You're a broker, and God's happier. And it's a dead animal. But He says here, offer your body as a living sacrifice. That means you're alive. There's energy left in you. There's a spirit in you. You're among the living still. People still see your face. You're still among the living. Offer your body as a living sacrifice. That there's energy in that. There's power in that. Holy and pleasing to God. Because we aim to be pleasing to Him in everything that we do. When we aim to be pleasing to God in everything that we do, then we are able to easier discover what His will is for us. It says that we are to be pleasing to Him. Now look, I want to look in Genesis chapter 19, verse 18 through 20, and then in verse 30. Genesis chapter 19, verse 18 through 20, and then verse 30. Here, this is Lot. He is in Sodom. God's about to destroy Sodom. He reveals to Abraham what He's about to do to Sodom. And Abraham starts to intercede because he knows that there is somebody righteous in that city. He happens to know that his nephew, Lot, is there. Yes. And Lot is considered a righteous man, according to the Scripture. But if you look at his life and some choices that he made, you'll find out that he wasn't seeking the will of God with all his heart. He wasn't completely offering himself as a living sacrifice to God. And look, it says, and it came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, escape for your life. See, this is the angels that came into the city because of Abraham's praying. So you and I's praying has an effect on people's life and on people's future. When you and I spend time interceding for people, it has an effect on people's lives. Our prayers are affecting the things that are happening in this city and in this country and in the world. Our prayers have that much weight. When we are following and obeying God and doing what He says and we begin to intercede for people, those prayers matter. And so Abraham intercedes for Lot, and God spares his life and sends angels to the city. And they come into the city and they're telling him, escape for your life. This is in verse 18. Escape for your life, look not behind you. See, he's saying don't look at the past. Forget about the past. Move on towards what's ahead. Don't look at the past. There's nothing in the past that's going to help you with where I'm taking you. Just look straight ahead. Keep your eyes straight on Christ. Keep your feet on the path that I have called you to. Yes. He says, neither stay in the plain, escape to the mountain. So he tells him, he gives him specific instructions about where to go. And that's what God does in you and I's life. He gives us specific instructions about where we are to go, what we are to do, how we are to behave. He doesn't leave anything untold that should be told. He gives us specific instructions about where we're to go. He says, lest you be consumed. And that's why sometimes we get consumed, because we go down a road that we don't need to be going down. And it turns out to be a waste of time.
Yes.
And Lot said unto them, Oh, no, not so, my Lord. Behold, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and has magnified your loving kindness towards me, which you have showed me by saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain. So he's telling him, go to the mountain. He's saying, no, I cannot go to the mountain. It's God saying, look, go do this. And us saying, no, I can't go. Okay, so here Lot is, he sees that God has saved his life, and that God has shown kindness to him by saving his life. See, this is like it said, I'm going off the point that says in view of God's mercy. Because we do things in view of God's mercy. God is prompting us to seek His will and to find out what His will is for our life in view of His mercy. And so here Lot is acknowledging that God has already had mercy on him by sparing his life. But he says, go to the mountain. He says, no, I can't go to the mountain. Please don't make me go to the mountain. He says, lest evil overtake me. He's terrified to go to the mountain. Even though God is telling him, go to the mountain, and God tells you and I to do some things, and sometimes we don't go on the first try. Because we're terrified or afraid or whatever we got going on in our life, we don't go the first time, and so we go around. Here he says, evil is going to overtake me and I'm going to die there. So God's already saved his life once, but now he's afraid that where God's sending him to, that he's going to die. So see, God doesn't save you and I's life to send us out to get killed somewhere. He saves our life because He has a future prepared for you and I.
That's right.
He saves our life because He knows what He wants to use our life to do. Who knows where He's taking us? Who knows what our testimony, the effect that it has on people and on the future and on the community that you and I live in? 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. We have no idea the effect that our words and that our life have on other people. And that's why we have to do what God says. That's why we have to go where He says for us to go. But He doesn't send us someplace just to kill us. So Lot's terrified God's going to send him to get killed. He says, behold now, the city is near, and I want to flee to that one. It's a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the... Okay, so he wants to go to the city. And if you read on in verse 21, the angel gives him permission to go. And usually in the scripture, when it says the angel, it's usually Jesus. He's usually referred to as the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. So he gives him permission to go, okay? And then look, he goes. And then you jump to verse 30. It says, and Lot went up out of Zoar. So that's where he requested to go. He said, no, I don't want to go to the mountain. I want to go to this little town here. And so he goes to the little town, and now look, it says Lot went up out of Zoar. So now he's leaving the town. And he dwelt in the mountain. That's where God told him to go in the first place.
Yes.
He told him, get out of here and go to the mountain. So he doesn't go to the mountain. He goes to the city. And he finds out that he's worse off in the city than he would have been of just going in the mountain in the first place.
Yes.
So see, you and I, when God is speaking something to our heart, we shouldn't be afraid of what God is saying. We shouldn't be afraid to receive what God is saying for our life and where he's telling us to go, even though it doesn't look like we can bear going there. Wherever God sends us, he's always going to provide for us.
Yes.
Whatever he asks us to do, he's always going to make a way for our life.
Yes.
And so he doesn't just send us someplace to have us die. He sends us to give us a future and to give us life and to revive us and to build us up and to preserve us. To preserve us as a testimony to the nations, to speak forth what he has done in our life. But it's easy to waste time and not go where God's sending us. But then we end up going there anyway. But look at all the time that was wasted. And why not just go the first time, the first go, and do what God is saying? It makes things so much easier. Then it says, we're back in Romans chapter 12. Holy and pleasing to God, this is your true and proper worship. So by offering our body as a living sacrifice, this is what's true and proper for us to do. This is what's reasonable for us to do. This word here from the Greek, I don't know what your translation might say, logical. This is the word logos or logikos from the Greek. It means it's a logical thing. It says properly, logical because divinely reasonable. What is logical to God? Logic working through the divine reasoning through faith. Divine reasoning through faith. You and I cannot reason with faith apart from God giving us the gift of faith. Then when God deposits the gift of faith into you and I's heart, then we can start to logically think about things. Because it's the logic of God, it's the faith mixed with our mind that produces the ability to be able to hear the voice of God and do what he's telling us to do and make sense out of what his calling is for our life. It says the believer grasps divine reasonableness. Divine reasonableness. See, that's not something that we're able to produce of ourselves. It's a divine thing. It's the power of faith. It's the faith that God puts inside of you and I's heart to be able to accomplish his will and to be able to do his calling. The inbirthings, the close connection between faith, logikos, is a constant necessity in making acceptable offerings to God. See, that's our reasonable worship.
Yes.
2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9 says, wherefore we make it our aim, whether we are home or absent, to be well-pleasing to him. So see, it says, holy and pleasing to God. We make it our aim with our life to be well-pleasing to him. Then it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Do not conform to the pattern of the world. See, the world has a pattern.
Yes.
The world has a pattern that it's trying to get you and I to conform to. And that pattern that the world has is a system of a certain type of behavior that keeps people in hell, that keeps people sad, that keeps people depressed, that keeps people angry, that keeps people without faith. It's a system. That's what this word is from the Greek. It says it is a system. Don't conform to the world system, the outward shape of the world that is produced by sinful behavior. See, this is not talking about, it's talking about the behavior of the world, that you and I are not to conform to what the world does. That everything that the world does and everything that the world produces is a distraction to you and I being able to accomplish the will of God for our life. And therefore, you and I have to separate ourselves. We have to separate our mind. We have to separate our time to be able to offer ourselves to God and offer our body as a living sacrifice so that we can offer proper worship to God. Because we don't want to offer strange worship to God. We want to offer proper worship to him. We want to offer logical worship to him. We want to offer worship to him that is produced in us by faith. And when it's produced in us by faith, then it always produces a future. It always produces something good. It always makes a way where there isn't a way. It always does something to better you and I and to better the lives of other people and to better the community and to better the society and to let people know that there is a God that exists, that still moves in the hearts of men, that is still doing miracles, that is still changing people's lives, that is still delivering people off drugs and from prostitution and from hatred and from bitterness and from envy and from all the other things in the world, the pattern of behavior in the world that's trying to destroy your life, that's trying to destroy your soul, that's trying to take your time and your effort and your energy and have you put it into something that doesn't matter and that doesn't produce anything for your life and for your future. the pattern of this world, the pattern of sinful behavior. He says, do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 5. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 5 through 7. Wherefore, when he comes into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you would not. He's talking about the animals. But a body you have prepared for me. So see, we have to separate our body from the things of this world. We have to physically separate our body from the things of this world. See, this is what Jesus is saying. He has prepared a body for me. He didn't desire all those things that you thought he desired of the past. He desires you.
Yes.
He desires your body. He desires you separate yourself and offer your body to him as a living sacrifice. In whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you had no pleasure. So those kind of things didn't please God anymore. The dead animals did not please God anymore. What pleases God is when you and I separate ourselves from the world, when we separate ourselves from the system of the world, and we allow God to use us, and we allow God to speak through us, and we allow Jesus to live inside of our heart and use our life to do something where we're at and set ourselves apart. See, that's our logical service. We set ourselves apart. We don't conform to the pattern. We don't conform to what the world is doing. We don't spend our time doing the same things that the world is doing, because it's going to be impossible for you and I to be able to reach the world if we spend our time doing the same things that they do, if we conform to the system that they conform to. We have to be separate from what the world is doing so that we can be pleasurable to him. And then he says, then lo, I said, I am come. In the roll of the book it is written of me. It was written of Jesus to come. We needed Jesus to enter into our life. We needed the faith and the hope of Jesus to enter into our life so that we could think right and do right and change our thinking and change our life and not conform to the pattern of the world anymore and do the will of God. To do thy will, O God. So see, Jesus' whole ministry and his whole life was to find out how he could better do the will of God for his life. So he was constantly, and you can read the book of Psalms and see all the testimonies of Jesus, how he was constantly trying to know what the will of God is and do the will of God and seek the will of God and show men that he was going to do the will of God, no matter what it cost him. That he was going to offer his body as a living sacrifice and do the will of God, no matter what the price was to pay. Genesis chapter 22, verse 5. Genesis 22, verse 5. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship, and we will come to you again. So offering logical worship to God. See, because we're after trying to know the will of God for our life. And knowing the will of God means that we offer to God reasonable, logical worship to him. See, Abraham had to offer logical worship to God. And what was it for Abraham? Well, he gave the best that he had. He offered up to God the best thing that he could possibly offer up in obedience. And he did it by faith. So anytime you and I put our faith to work, then we're worshiping God. Anytime we use the faith that we have inside of our heart to accomplish things in our life, then we're offering logical worship to God, and then we're able to better understand his will for our life. And he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. First Peter 1:14. 1 Peter 1:14. As children of obedience, not fashioning yourselves according to your former lusts in your time of ignorance. See, and this word fashioning here is the same as the word of the pattern for the world. It's the same as the world system. See, because the whole entire world system is built on lust. Whatever it is, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. The entire world system is built on those three things. And see, he says, as children of obedience, so that when we obey God, we don't fashion ourselves any longer to those things. We separate ourselves from those things. We have separated ourselves from the things that bring destruction in our life. The former lusts that we used to do in ignorance. And we've all done a lot of things in ignorance. But now Christ has risen in our heart. Now Christ has shown us the proper way to do things, the proper way to offer ourselves. Then you will be able to attest and approve what God's will is. See, in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 it says, prove all things. Hold fast to that which is good. We're to prove everything, even the will of God. But we can't prove the will of God if we don't constantly offer ourselves as a living sacrifice to Him. It says, prove what God's will is. Test and approve. So we have to approve it. We have to approve what His will is for our life. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. John chapter 2, verse 17. And the world passes away in the lust thereof.
Yes.
But he that does the will of God abides forever. So you and I are a product that is being created that will abide forever if we do the will of God. How many things you know go on forever? Even a battery, it dies after a while. Everything, you look, trees die, everything, cars break down. But you and I are, when we do the will of God, it says that we're going to live forever. There will be no end to you and I.
That's right.
We do the will of God, we will live forever. That is His promise according to His word. And so He wants us to know what His will is for our life. He wants us to know what His perfect will is for you and I's life. Not just half of His will. Not just sometimes knowing what His will is. All the time, constantly seeking the face of Christ. Not wanting to know and see Jesus with our life. Wanting to be able to experience what it is to know Jesus moving inside of us and working miracles inside of our life and delivering us and getting us to think and live right in this world. He wants to do those kind of things in us. He wants to reveal His will for us. He wants to reveal what He wants to do with our life to us. He wants to show us where He's going to take us and what kind of things we can do for Him, where we can work for Him at, how we can be closer to Him and hear His voice more, and be healed and be helped and be delivered, and not be conformed to the world anymore. Thinking straight, knowing how to use our time, being strong all the time to do the will of God, seeking Him constantly. He wants us to know His will. He wants us to approve what His will is for our life. We have to approve it. He doesn't make us approve it. We have to approve it for our own life. It's not a credit company approving it for us. We approve what His will is for our life. We test and see if something is the will of God for our life. And it's so much better to do His will, living in this life. Because we're going to all die one day. None of us is going to be left here in 100 years from now. We're going to all be long gone. But the lives that we reach, the testimony that we speak to the world, will go on.
Yes.
It will not return void.
Yes.
So let's press in this week. Let's do what we can to, let's search out inside of our own heart how we can better do the will of God for our life. How we can better hear the voice of God and approve what His will is. Because His will, it says, is good, pleasing, and perfect.
Yes.
There is no lack when we do His will.
Amen.
Hallelujah.